The remote wind-battered island of St. Helena, a volcanic rock isolated in the vast emptiness of the South Atlantic Ocean. A heavy silence hung over the valley of the tomb as a group of French and British officials, accompanied by laborers wielding heavy iron tools, stood before a solid stone slab. Among them was Louis Marchand, a man who had served as a loyal valet to the greatest military commander of the modern age. He had watched his master take his final breath exactly 19 years earlier. The laborers began their grueling work, spending hours digging through the damp earth to reach the burial vault. They expected to find brittle bones and tattered fabric, but as they hoisted the massive coffins and breached the layers of mahogany, lead, and tin, the atmosphere grew tense. When the final lid was lifted, Louis Marchand and the rest of the delegation stepped forward, holding their breath. What they saw inside did not belong to the natural order of the world. There were no scattered bones. There was no dust. Lying before them, perfectly intact, was Napoleon Bonaparte. His face, the very same face that had stared down empires at Austerlitz and Marengo, was instantly recognizable. His flesh had not succumbed to the ravages of time. His legendary green uniform of the chasseur à cheval, complete with the red ribbon of the Legion of Honor resting across his chest, was flawlessly preserved. According to the stunned accounts of the men present, the Emperor of the French did not look dead. He looked as though he was merely in a deep, quiet sleep. How was this scientifically possible? How could a human body, buried in the damp tropical earth of a South Atlantic island, completely halt the process of biological decay for 19 years? For a long time, the narrative surrounding Napoleon's pristine corpse focused entirely on the mechanics of his burial. When he died in 1821, after 6 miserable years of exile following his final defeat at Waterloo, the British government was terrified. They were terrified of him in life, and they were terrified of what he might represent after death. They wanted to ensure he could never be moved, stolen, or turned into a martyr's relic. So his captors and his loyalists agreed on an incredibly complex, fortress-like burial. Napoleon was sealed inside a series of nested coffins, an inner tin lining, a solid mahogany shell, and a heavy airtight lead coffin, all encased within a massive mahogany outer coffin. Historians and forensic pathologists point to this airtight lead seal as the primary reason for his preservation. However, modern researchers realize that an airtight coffin alone does not guarantee such miraculous preservation. There was a missing piece to this puzzle, and that missing piece transforms the story of Napoleon's death from a medical decline into a dark, enduring historical thriller. The secret to why the emperor looked like a sleeping god 19 years later is hidden in the very thing that ended his life. The official autopsy report from 1821, signed by his attending physicians, concluded that Napoleon died of severe stomach cancer. His father had died of a similar affliction, and the autopsy noted a massive ulcerated tumor in his stomach. For a long time, history accepted this as the final word. The conqueror of Europe was simply brought down by his own genetics. But years later, a darker theory emerged. Whispers began to circulate that the British, terrified of the massive financial and military cost of keeping him guarded, had quietly and slowly murdered him. When modern scientists managed to obtain locks of Napoleon's hair, clippings taken by his servants immediately after his death, they subjected them to highly advanced nuclear testing and mass spectrometry. The results were staggering. The emperor's hair contained massive, lethal concentrations of arsenic. Instantly, the poisoning theories exploded. Had a British assassin been slipping arsenic into his wine? Had a traitor within his own French entourage been bribed to end his life? Later, chemical analysis pointed to an accidental environmental poisoning. The walls of Longwood House, Napoleon's damp residence on St. Helena, were covered in a bright green wallpaper made with copper arsenite. In that humid environment, microscopic fungi on the walls reacted with the copper arsenite, releasing toxic arsenic vapor into the air. Breathing this invisible poison for years ravaged his immune system and likely accelerated his fatal cancer. But here is the chilling plot twist. Before the widespread use of formaldehyde, arsenic was one of the most powerful chemical preservatives, heavily used in taxidermy. The very poison that killed the emperor had saturated his tissues, acting as a deep tissue mummification agent that aggressively halted his biological decay inside the airtight coffin. The British exile had not just killed him, it had accidentally immortalized him. And in 1840, that immortalized face was exactly what the struggling government of France desperately needed. The decision to dig up Napoleon and bring him back to Europe was not made out of sudden nostalgia or pure historical respect. It was a cold, calculated, and entirely cynical political maneuver. By 1840, France was a deeply divided and volatile nation. The Bourbon kings who had replaced Napoleon were overthrown. The country was now ruled by King Louis-Philippe I, the leader of the so-called July monarchy. But Louis-Philippe's reign was incredibly fragile. He was unpopular, facing constant threats from royalist factions on the right and rising Republican revolutionaries on the left. The economy was unstable, and the glory days of the French Empire felt like a distant, slipping memory. The king needed a miracle to unite the country. He needed a symbol so powerful, so universally revered by the common people and the military, that it would force his enemies to stand down and rally behind the throne. He realized that the ghost of Napoleon Bonaparte was the most powerful political weapon in Europe. Louis-Philippe negotiated with the British government, who, eager to improve diplomatic relations with France, gladly agreed to hand over the body. The king dispatched a heavily armed naval expedition, led by his own son, to sail to the edge of the world, retrieve the fallen emperor, and bring him home. This grand operation was romantically dubbed the Retour des Cendres, the Return of the Ashes. When the French frigate Belle arrived back in France in December 1840, carrying the remarkably preserved body of the emperor, the country erupted in a wave of mass hysteria. It was a spectacle unlike anything the 19th century had ever seen. On December 15th, in the freezing cold of a Parisian winter, millions of people lined the streets. Veterans of Napoleon's legendary Grand Army, now old men with white hair, wept openly as they wore their faded, battle-worn uniforms one last time. Church bells rang relentlessly across the city. Cannons fired echoing salutes. The colossal imperial hearse, drawn by 16 horses draped in gold, carried the emperor down the Champs-Élysées. It passed directly beneath the Arc de Triomphe, the magnificent monument Napoleon had commissioned at the height of his power, but had never lived to see completed. The procession moved slowly, like a conquering army returning from the dead, until it reached Les Invalides, the military complex that serves as the heart of France's martial history. King Louis-Philippe stood waiting inside. When the coffin was finally carried through the towering doors, the king stepped forward, orchestrating the ultimate theatrical illusion. He was attempting to absorb the aura of the emperor, hoping the blinding light of Napoleon's legacy would cast a protective shadow over his own fragile crown. But history has a strange sense of justice. King Louis-Philippe's desperate PR stunt ultimately failed. Despite the overwhelming success of the parade, the magic did not transfer to the monarch. 8 years later, in 1848, the French people revolted once again. Louis-Philippe was overthrown, stripped of his crown, and forced to flee the country in disgrace. And who stepped into the power vacuum left behind? Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor's own nephew, who rode the renewed wave of Bonapartist fever straight into the presidency, eventually crowning himself Emperor Napoleon III. Today, Napoleon Bonaparte rests in a magnificent towering sarcophagus of red quartzite, situated directly beneath the golden dome of Les Invalides. It is one of the most visited, most awe-inspiring tombs anywhere on the planet. His body has not been officially seen since that damp, startling morning in 1840. He remains sealed away in the dark, an untouchable relic of a chaotic age. When we look back at the exhumation of Napoleon, we are not just looking at a bizarre historical footnote or a morbid medical curiosity. We are witnessing the ultimate proof of how power operates. Napoleon spent his entire life bending the world to his will, using men, armies, and nations to build his legend. But in death, the conqueror became the conquered. He was used by a desperate king in Paris who tried to bring his remains back to save a dying regime. Yet, as the airtight coffin was sealed for the final time beneath the golden dome of Paris, it was the emperor who claimed the ultimate victory. Thank you for watching. If you're fascinated by the hidden truths of history, the secrets buried in ancient graves, and the incredible forensic science that rewrites our past, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. What do you believe really happened on St. Helena? Was it a tragic accident of toxic wallpaper, or the perfect invisible murder? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring.